Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the state of New Hampshire and specifically the 1st Congressional District, where a new poll has come out showing who the Democratic leader is currently in the Democratic primary for this race. So if you're unfamiliar, the 1st Congressional District in the state of New Hampshire is based in southeastern New Hampshire and includes the greater Manchester area, the Seacoast, and the Lakes region of the state. The incumbent representative is Democrat Chris Pappas. Now, if you've been following New Hampshire politics, you'll know Chris Pappas has decided not to run for re-election to the House in 2026, as he is retiring to run for the U.S. Senate seat in 2026. That incumbent Democrat Stefany Shaheen is ultimately retiring from that race. Now, Pappas has the Democratic primary completely on lock at the Senate side. He already has the endorsement of Shaheen and Senator Hassan and fellow Representative Maggie Goodlander, so Chris Pappas is going to be the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate race. Now, the 1st Congressional District, the Democratic nominee to replace Pappas, is a little more wide open. However, an early poll from St. Anselm College, one of the top political universities or colleges in New Hampshire, gives a clear indication of who's leading this race. Where Democrats right now in alphabetical order are Carly Bariant, Sarah Chadninsky, Keith Howard, a state representative from Stratford's 4th District, Stefany Shaheen, who is the former Portsmouth City Councilor and daughter of U.S. Senator Jean Shaheen, Maura Sullivan, the vice chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, who is also the runner-up candidate to Chris Pappas back in 2018. She is making another run, trying to run up against Stefany Shaheen, and Christian Urrutia, lawyer and Army National Guard captain. Now, other Democrats have also expressed interest or are getting close to running this race. Alice Wade, a state representative, is a formed exploratory committee. Joanna Kelly, assistant mayor of Portsmouth. Rebecca Perkins-Quokka, the minority leader of the New Hampshire Senate, has expressed interest. And Hannah Trudeau, a former senior political consultant at The Hill, has also expressed interest in running for this race. Now, there are a lot of Democrats running. The two most notable in the race thus far are Stefany Shaheen and Maura Sullivan. They seem to have the most in terms of candidate quality, political clout, and political headwind for this race. Now, the early endorsements thus far, Maura Sullivan has actually raked up a pretty good number, with executive branch official George Charles Bruno, the former U.S. ambassador to Belize under Bill Clinton, U.S. Representatives Chris Deluzzo of Pennsylvania and Seth Moulton of Massachusetts have given their endorsement to Maura Sullivan in this race. Now, for Stefany Shaheen, she has the endorsement already of former governor of New Hampshire, John Lynch, and state legislators John Morgan and Tom Sherman. Now, for polling-wise, though, this is the biggest development in the race thus far. Stefany Shaheen starts out with 23% of support in the St. Anselm College Democratic primary poll. In second place, once again, is Maura Sullivan at 9%. Now, from there, Keith Howard is at 4%, Carly Bariant's at 4%, Sarah Chadninsky has 1%, Christian Urrutia has 2%, 59% still undecided. So this race is still very much wide open when it comes to who could win this Democratic primary when there's enough undecided vote to tip the scales of this race. But it is very clear thus far that we have Stefany Shaheen leading in this race and likely, at this current point, to be the Democratic primary. Now, I do want to show you real quickly the 2018 House race, because this was when Pappas won against Republican Eddie Edwards, but this Democratic primary was also very close. This was the first time this district's Democratic primary was open. There's been a little bit of history in New Hampshire where in the 1st district up through 2016, Democrat Carol Shea Porter and Republican Frank Ginta, since really I think it was about 2010 or so, I think, have essentially since about 2010, went back and forth on this district in terms of who won and who lost. Ginta won it in 2010, Shea Porter in 2012. 2014, Frank Ginta won it. 2016, Carol Shea Porter won it. Now, 2018 was the first time neither Shea Porter or Ginta ran for this district. This time it was Pappas versus Eddie Edwards. And ultimately what ended up happening in this race was Chris Pappas faced off in a Democratic primary with several other notable Democrats. Now, Pappas at the time did hold elected office in New Hampshire. He was an executive counselor of New Hampshire for the 4th District, which encompasses his home city of Manchester. He faced off against several Democrats in the primary, including, at the time, former Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, Maura Sullivan. Now, this Democratic primary was actually pretty competitive. Now, the endorsements and such were also notable. Pappas had the endorsement of Maggie Hassan, Annie Kuster, the former representative, and Senator Jean Shaheen. So Pappas, Shaheen, and Hassan go back at very least to Pappas's first run in 2018 in terms of supporting him, and that is very significant. Morris Sullivan did have the endorsement of Emily's List, a very prominent Democratic PAC, but did not have the endorsement of the top statewide Democrats in the race. And even though the primary, still by primary standards, ended up being pretty competitive, Pappas ended up winning 42.2% to Sullivan's 30.4%. So decently competitive, but Chris Pappas did end up winning. Now when we're talking about 2026, it seems to be a very similar situation, where Stefany Shaheen seems to be the leading Democratic candidate that has the most support consolidated, where Morris Sullivan is running, again, trying to be a competitive race, but is running in a distant second place at this current point in time to the leading Democrat. Now, Stefany Shaheen also got out and endorsed Chris Pappas in the Senate race very early, and seeing as her mother also, Jean Shaheen, endorsed Pappas as well, we could see Pappas eventually throw an endorsement behind Stefany Shaheen in this race. But right now, even though there's enough undecided vote to tip the scales, it certainly looks like Stefany Shaheen is the leader in this Democratic primary right now. And that is very big. As Republicans, there are several Republicans who could run and are running in this race, but there's not one notable Republican running, especially against a name as big in New Hampshire politics as Shaheen, which has been a very dominant political name in New Hampshire for the last 20 years or so. On the Republican side, Melissa Bailey is running, Chris Bright, a candidate in 2024, is running, and Brian Cole, a state representative, is running. Another candidate that's filed paperwork is Elizabeth Gerard, who was the former New Hampshire co-chair for Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, as well as two other candidates from 2024 in Holly Novoletsky and Russell Prescott, also expressing interest. Prescott ended up being the Republican nominee in 2024. Now, the election did not go super great for Prescott, as Pappas won by about 8 points or so, but now they won't have to face off against Prescott, or Prescott won't have to face off against Pappas, but he may have to face off against Jean Shaheen. The only other potential candidate is John Fermella, the New Hampshire Attorney General, but no indication has been given at this current point in time. It should also be worth noting that U.S. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who did run for this district and become the nominee in 2022, is not going to run for this race in 2026. Obviously, she's busy serving President Trump and the Trump administration and the White House. Now, the St. Anselm College poll did do the Republican primary as well. Right now, a massive amount of undecided vote, with 84% currently undecided. Chris Bright is the early leader right now at 8%, though, again, only a 3-point lead over Brian Cole and Melissa Bailey at 3%, 84% undecided. Essentially, no clear Republican leader in this race at this current point in time. I would bet if we see Novoletsky or Prescott jump into this race, if they both jump in, it'll be very competitive. If only one of them does, we're likely going to see a very close race like we saw in 2024. For that primary, also, you want to talk about a very close primary, you can look at this Republican primary from 2024, where the polling was not too much, but also showed a pretty tight primary with a lot of undecided votes. Prescott ended up getting 26.1%, Novoletsky got 23.8%, and Joseph Lavasser, who is not going to run again in 2026, got 23.1%. So with this, only about 2,000 votes separating Prescott and Novoletsky, we may see a similar face-off in 2026. Now, for the general election, no polls have been conducted thus far, but Cook Political Report has it likely Democrat, Inside Elections, Sourdough's Crystal Ball has it as lean. Now, the election history in this district has been very interesting, because Chris Pappas won it by 8 points against Russell Prescott in 2024. And I can actually pull up the congressional map here. New Hampshire breaks it down, the district by town, gives you a town-by-town breakdown. Obviously, the largest city in this district is the city of Manchester, which Chris Pappas, being his hometown, won it by a resounding 18 points. Just to give you an idea, the governor's race in 2024, Kelly Ayotte won this city of Manchester. It was pretty close, but she did win Manchester and she did win Hillsborough County. Chris Pappas won the town, his hometown, by 18 points. Very, very big, even for a Democrat in more of a Democratic city. Pappas won it by 18 points. Very, very big. The city of Dover as well. It's a little bit, it's north. This is the Lakes region over here, but moving into more central New Hampshire now. Dover, a 36-point win. Derry, which is a usually pretty strong Republican suburb, only went red for Prescott by about 3 points. You essentially saw Pappas win almost every single suburb key town here, like Rochester, Londonderry, Bedford, Hampton, Goffstown, even in Laconia. these places all went blue for Pappas. In a competitive election, it's probably not going to look like this, but for Pappas, put on pretty much a very strong clinic in this district of how a Democrat needs to win. Now, you can look at 2022, where Pappas faced off against then Republican candidate Caroline Leavitt, and essentially the exact same result, 8.1%. You look at the results, Leavitt did not really fare much better than Prescott did in 2024. Though it is worth interesting that considering in 2024, which President Trump did much better in New Hampshire than he did in 2020, still this district did not move that much. That might be more of an indictment on Chris Pappas than it was about Caroline Leavitt, but Pappas still put on a very strong showing in this district. The last time this race was remotely really competitive was 2020. Pappas won it by 5.1% against the Republican Matt Mowers. Mowers did better in the surrounding areas around Manchester than Pappas did in 2022 and 2024, but even then, you still see Pappas putting up some very strong numbers in the Seacoast area and into the central part of the eastern part of New Hampshire in that regard. So still, a more competitive map for the Republicans to follow for this race in 2026 if they are trying to make this race competitive. But Republicans are going to be in for a tough fight as they are going to be facing off, in all likelihood, against Stefany Shaheen and her family's strong political prowess in the state. Now, if you're unfamiliar, her mother Jean Shaheen, she just won her Senate race in 2020 by 15.6%. After she won in 2014 against Scott Brown by 3.2%, and in 2008, she defeated then Republican Senator John E. Sununu, the brother of Governor Sununu, by 6.3%. Now, she's been running in New Hampshire for a while. Her first race at the Senate level was back in 2002, where she lost to Sununu by 4.4. So Shaheen, or a Shaheen, has been on the ballot in New Hampshire in every single, or at least in every election or sort since 2002. There's been a Shaheen on the ballot on the Senate side of things with Jean Shaheen. Now, her daughter is going to be potentially on the ballot in the 1st Congressional District, where for 2026, right now, the consensus ratings for the state of New Hampshire currently have the state listed, or the district listed, as lean for the Democrats. And that's personally my own rankings, where I also have it listed right now. The Cook Political Voting Index, it was even in 2023, now listed at Democrat +2. So Democrats do have a slight advantage in this district, but not a very drastic one that Republicans cannot overcome. But with like a name like Shaheen on the district and on the candidate list for 2026, I think we see the Democrats hold on and win New Hampshire's 1st district by a smaller margin than Pappas did in 2024. But I do think Shaheen, if she's a Democratic candidate, could win this race by similar margins as Pappas did. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it interesting. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this video and any other questions or such you have about New Hampshire and this 1st district. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video.